CooperTalk.
Welcome to CooperTalk. I'm your host, Steve Cooper, and remember, I'm only as hip as my guest. I got to tell you something, people. The gentleman on my show today, he actually did CooperTalk the first time 10 years ago, and then he did it 2 years after that. And I haven't talked to him since, and he's always working, and he has a new movie out called No Address, which actually his artwork was at the premiere, which is very cool. And it's Xander Berkeley. How you doing, Xander?
I'm good, Steve. How are you?
I'm doing great. So tell me about No Address, because it really tackles a situation that's going on in America, and we both have left L.A., so it was very evident when I left in L.A., the homeless situation. But tell me all about No Address.
Well, it was a guy who lives up in Sacramento, who very successful, and he was driving by the longest contiguous homeless encampment there is, I think, anywhere along the Sacramento River there in Sacramento, and just couldn't let another day go by and drive past it one more time and not do something. And so he put out, he's always been interested in movies, didn't have a background really in it, but he put out a search for scripts dealing with homelessness, and then found a woman that had written a script that had won some awards. She'd produced but hadn't directed much, I don't think. And they started working together, and they did a documentary that was called Americans with No Address around the same time. And we got to work, I got to work a little bit on that as well. And that was a tremendous source of educating the performance and the film in general. They went to 21 different cities and interviewed people on the streets, as well as people that ran the organizations that were providing what proved in their research to be the most effective treatment, which is a wraparound health care, mental health care, drug and alcohol rehabilitation, job training and placement, the whole 9 yards. And the guy determined that he was going to, the profits, take 50% of the proceeds and give it to those organizations that had the highest success in getting people off the streets and keeping them off the streets. And there are some incredible organizations that we've found out about as a result of this whole project. But my character, it was about a group in the encampment that sort of form a kind of dysfunctional, functioning family that they chose, and they were trying to keep themselves clean and get their act together and take advantage of whatever resources there were out there while overcoming the day in and day out hardships that a lot of us sort of avert our gaze from. And it was an incredible experience working on it. People it opened in theaters, but, it's a tough, people, especially like in Los Angeles, you see it all the time. You don't necessarily want to go and see it in a movie theater because one thinks oftentimes of going to the movies as an escape of sorts. But I think people knowing that if they hit the link and go and watch the movie, either the documentary or the feature, that they're going to be participating in something. They're going to be contributing to these organizations potentially by watching. That might provide some incentive, because it is a hard subject matter, but it is ultimately a really uplifting film. And I think we all kind of know in the back of our minds that homelessness is something that can happen to anybody. Just losing your job, losing, health care, losing relationships. People fall through the net in a very wide array of ways. I think we all know that. And this movie attempts to show a few of the different ways, and also, in addition to showing the obstacles, the possibilities that are out there for help. And anyway, so it's noaddressmovie.com.
Now,
gets you access.
Now, when you developed the character, you had said you worked on the documentary. So you're developing characters as a homeless person. As I'm sure you've never been homeless. You know, you're a New Jersey guy. You've had a very successful career. I'm sure you've encountered it a lot, people who are homeless. We all do in LA and now in Philadelphia. It's funny, moving back to the Philadelphia area. When I go into Philadelphia, people are like, oh my God, there's so much homeless. I'm like, no, go to LA. It's like a lot worse. But for you, when you developed the character, did you pull from people that in the documentary, or how do you go? Because, you know, you've had so many different roles. How did you pull for this character? What did they say, run with it, Xander, or where did the character come from?
Well, the guy was a vet and sort of the patriarch of this group that comes together, and he had a dream of doing portraits of the people in the thing and selling them and helping to make some money, and that's something that happens in the course of the thing. And because I am a painter, it was easy to sort of find how my character would paint and what approach he would take to that. But I interviewed a lot of people, and I've spent most of my adult life around it, and I'll never forget right after Reagan got in, the strange relationship that took place between the left and the right. It was around the time of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, not long after that. And the left was moving to try and stop the abhorrent institutionalizing of people that just were trying to be themselves. And, you know, there's a lot of truth in that. A lot of people were wrongly, I think, institutionalized, but for the most part, there were a lot of people that were in there because they needed to be. And whether or not the treatment was right, because in some cases, you know, they were doing, like, apropos that time period, electroshock and all kinds of other questionable approaches to dealing with mental issues. But that the right was like, let's stop having, you know, these programs that are just spending money. You know, I think we can see that happening today. There's a desire to get rid of a lot of social programs. Costing taxpayer money. So this combination of impulses sort of combined in the worst way I can remember, because I was brought out by an agent from New York in 1979. And it was like overnight in 1980, after Reagan came in, towards 1981, going back and forth between New York and LA, it was like overnight different. There were just people dumped out of mental institutions, mental hospitals, and just out on the streets, off their meds, self-medicating or not. Just, it was like a mass proliferation. And I don't think we've ever quite gotten the genie back in the bottle after that. We've had sort of ebbs and flows, but in recent years it's become terrible, and it's again a combination of left and the right. We had a very interesting time working through this with the movie, because we had people on both the left and the right, but we were all meeting in the center of how do we work together to try and overcome the divides in the country at the moment. But yeah, I think we see programs that were well-intentioned on the left, like housing for all, but not taking responsibility, not having to do anything in the way of showing your readiness, or that you were clean or able to maintain a house, so people would just, you know, make a wreck of it. And that didn't work out terribly well. And the amount of money that's being spent now on especially with fentanyl on the streets, there's people ODing all the time, and it costs so much money every time they come out, and they have the freedom to just walk away and have it happen later that day, conceivably. And you know, there's a lot of, like I say, well-intentioned programs on the left, and then on the right, the impulse to be, you know, well, you know, we found a lot of organizations that were faith-based that were doing some of the best work in the country, and then there's a lot that, you know, it's a big mixed bag. And there's no one simple solution, except that working with a few of these both secular and non-secular outfits that working in different parts of the country to try and tackle the problem is first of all, it's just so humbling to be around people that have dedicated their lives to this. Like that's what they're doing with their lives. Couple just retiring from being with the Salvation Army for 37 years. The amazing couple. And then, like I said, both faith-based and not. But one way or another, it looked as though personal responsibility and taking some step to say, I'm ready to make a change, it seems to be a kind of a precursor to any kind of success they have in those organizations. And one of the things that I thought was most interesting is that a lot of the people that are running these organizations had once been on the streets and had been homeless. And one of the things that seemed to be a through line, and I recommend people watch that documentary, Americans with No Address, because these people articulate it so well, but that never look down at somebody, but that you're willing to offer a hand to help them up. It's something that somebody says towards the end. And a lot of these people that were in recovery found that being told, get woken up to the crack of dawn by somebody saying, help somebody, help somebody, help somebody. Never dawned on that they had enough value that they would be able to help somebody. But that little trigger seemed to be behind a lot of incredibly inspiring success stories of people's recovery and finding a real place in the world, helping other people. It seems to bring a sense of purpose and a sense of pride and all kinds of good things. And so, yeah.
Now, you mentioned something earlier, and I want to hear how this worked out. You said on the set, you had people left and people right, and then the country is so divided right now. But you all had a common goal to get this movie done. So how did you make that work? Because, we see it, people are just, they get mean. I mean, like, I can't even post a joke that's a little bit spare. It's not even, I don't try to post anything political for jokes, but people sit there and they read something to it, and then a whole argument blows up on your page, and it's just the way it is. How did you guys work? Was it because your love of film, love of the project? I mean, what made it work? Because you both probably, as you said, it's not like my mom was a Democrat, my dad was a Republican, but they were happily married for years. There was never arguing at the dinner table. We didn't talk politics. That was the rule. No politics at the dinner table, and don't ask who you voted for. But how did you guys make it work on set? Because this fascinates me that there's both sides, and we don't think about that. Because everyone, you always hear, liberal Hollywood, which is bullshit. But how did it work?
It was interesting on set. We mostly just focused on the story and the characters. In the Billy Baldwin and I got very involved in trying to amplify the documentary and doing just work to try and get this movie out there. Because we both, I sort of started saying from all the way back in 1980, I would spend time on the streets with people that were homeless. And one of the things I noticed that some people just need to be seen and heard. And I was a big enough guy that I could assess what was dangerous and what wasn't. And, if I walked by somebody and didn't have money and I found myself like going, I'm going to give them money just for drinking and taking drugs, and that's not going to help anything. And I think that's a line that goes through a lot of our heads that justifies walking away. But my conscience would nag at me pretty consistently, and I would go and get food whenever I had a little time or an opportunity, or I saw somebody look like maybe they could use a meal, and go and hang out and just give them something to eat and take a moment to ask them some questions, just see if they were getting treatment and if everything was okay, and just sometimes just sitting there and hanging out and just having somebody stop and look at them sometimes just reminds them that there's some hope, because they become invisible out there sitting on the street. I did a lot of research, I think, over a long period of time that way, just watching behavior and stuff. some of the behaviors that go with either drug addiction or withdrawal from drugs. Or one of the choices I made, because my character was clean, was that he began drawing and doing artwork, something to do with his hands, just to keep him away from, because nature abhors a vacuum. If you just stop doing whatever it was you were doing, what are you going to do? And so I made his choice to be that. That's how he got into it originally. When we were talking to one of the guys that was one of the producers that was involved with the film, had been the czar of homelessness under a few different administrations. And he would, when we were working, I just remember, like, we would have long conversations. Billy and I were hanging out. We're old friends. We've done internal affairs together, so known each other a long time. And we love talking politics and what's going on in the world. And after rapping, we would sit in the lobby and sometimes just wee hours just talking about stuff. And Robert always informed it from his involvement in politics on the right. And yet he really enjoyed us and our company, and Billy and he just worked on another documentary about fentanyl, and really enjoyed going to these places and having forums where you're talking from the left and the right, because we all know that there's problems on both sides. I think anybody with any common sense knows that there's no one side that's perfect and the other side that's all wrong. There's good intentions on both sides, and there's mistakes that are made, and I think one of the biggest mistakes that are being made across the country and in government is not communicating, not just listening and talking. And I think the best way to learn more about things is to talk about people that have different points of view than yourself. And I think we all kind of came to that agreement that we would just be more informed the more we spoke, and not look at each other as on opposing sides, but just bringing information from different sides to the table.
That's so important, and we need to do that more. And it's true. I used to have two friends when I was in LA that we would go back to my house, and one was really right, one was really left. And we would drink a few bottles of wine, and they would just talk. And I would just be fascinated with the conversation they're having. And at the end, they're like, "Hey, you know what, man? I think you have a little bit of a point there." And I think you would. And it wasn't just like they wouldn't shut each other down. And I think the way our country is now, a lot of that open communication has left us. But like for you guys, you're on a movie set and you have the same goal to get something done. So I think that's what's great with your guys' relationship, because hey man, our main goal is to get this out and more homeless awareness. So it must have been great. It must have been somewhat invigorating to have, someone from the right and you're talking and you're actually having a real conversation, just not some bullshit.
Yeah. I mean, it's so much better way to learn than just preaching to the choir and hearing the same old point of view being expressed in slightly different ways. It's a troubling time out there right now, I think, in a lot of ways, but I think the more we can bear addressing it and talking without hostility about it, the better off we all will be.
Now, how great was it that your artwork, first of all, when did you start artwork? Were you an actor first or a painter first, or how did it, and I know I follow you on Facebook, I think you sculpt too, you do a whole bunch of stuff, but when did you decide to become a painter? Was that something during your acting career or when you were little?
Well, my father was an artist and became head of the art department for a publishing company to make a living, but he was always doing artwork at home throughout my childhood, and he was always giving us art supplies. And when I was lucky, he'd have time to give me some instruction on one thing or another. My sister was 2.5 years older than me, and she kind of staked out the turf, so I kind of knew I had to find my own thing. And I was into the acting from very, very early on as well. And was drawn to, my mother could make costumes and sewed really well, and I was really into costumes when I was little, and so it started out as a thing to engage the imagination and just go out into the woods and be like time travel and be somebody from another place and in another time, and that imaginative leap was really exciting to me. And so that then, whenever there was a chance to play a part, something early on in grade school, I'd jump at it, and then throughout high school, I got involved with the theater company, and so I was but I was always doing artwork as well, and it's a great companion because with acting, you're dependent upon somebody else hiring you, and when the thing goes, and you have to be navigating the course with various other egos and hierarchies, and there's a lot of there's a big dance involved in working steadily in the acting business, and having a companion like artwork on location in countries where they don't speak English. I could always just go to the art supply store, get what I needed to sit in a cafe and draw. Drawing has been a constant throughout my life. And then started painting, I guess, about 40 maybe years ago. I'd painted in high school, and I got into a big art show, and all my paintings were stolen. And that, like, flattering theoretically is, it just traumatized me at the time, and I didn't go near paints for a long time. And then in Los Angeles, at a certain point, say about 35 years ago, I started getting into painting, and I'm doing another movie now, and I'm certainly drawn to those characters that allow me to draw on that. I'm looking like a painter, I guess, these days, and I'm doing a horror film where the main character is a big abstract expressionist painter, and the director started out as an abstract expressionist, and I've been making some forays in that direction. It's a totally different form for me. But the director also likes my style, and so I'm doing both representational and non-representational, and on a big scale. And we have a farm out about an hour west of where we live here in Maine, and it's a big barn and a big carriage house. The carriage house is my winter studio, and the barn is my summer studio. Yeah, it's just been great getting to do both, play a character, do the artwork. I was always into like special effects makeup has always been one of my little secret things, that I could change the way I looked and stuff, and everybody else would be in the trailer getting pretty, and I'm in there making myself messed up.
Well, it's funny about effects and stuff like that. I know you posted on Facebook a reel, it was a few years ago, of all these scenes that you died in.
Oh yeah, the death reel.
Now, how many scenes have you died in, and what would you rank your best, and then what was the worst, like the one you go, holy crap, I can't believe they killed me that way?
That's interesting. It's funny, I just got scanned yesterday for some crazy death I'm about to undergo in Kentucky next month. I think they promised me that it would make it to the death reel, and it was going to be good, so I said, all right, let's see. The Terminator 2 demise, drinking from the carton of milk at the blade, wife turning into the T-1000 turning into my wife, who then turns into a knife blade as she slashes as I'm bad-mouthing the dog and drinking straight from the carton. Was a kind of classic death in Terminator 2. A lot of people saw that a bunch of times, so that's the first one that comes to people's mind. But yeah, I've been impaled in the head several ways. I've been stabbed any number of times in the shower or just walking by, and shot endless different ways in different places. I've fallen from buildings more than 3 or 4 times, 30-foot drops. So you spend the day with your stunt double, who goes to the window, and with your dummy double that goes, I go to the window, stunt guy goes through the window, dummy goes down. And, but we're all 3 dressed alike, and spending the day together. Yeah, I crashed in a bunch of planes, and Clint Eastwood shot me in the plane, and when I went into the building as I was taking off, and And then in Air Force One, I go down with the plane. And 24, I got to not only go down with the plane, but blow up with the nuclear bomb that was on it. So, yeah, I made my living dying.
That is amazing. Now, I just wanted to ask you this. I want to ask you about Maine because you're the third actor I know who moved to Maine. Peter Murnick is a gentleman who's been on my show, and Reed Diamond have both moved to Maine. What took you to Maine? Because you're a New Jersey guy. You've been in Hollywood for a long time. You've traveled the world. You've constantly worked. And I guess now in the business, you don't have to be in LA. You can be anywhere. But what ended up bringing you to Maine, and what do you love about it? Because I know when I left, I came back to my home roots of South Jersey. And for the first few months, you have to decompress because you're used to it's going to take you forever. Or when you go to the supermarket in LA, when you see someone who looks like an actor, it's that actor. When you go somewhere and you say, hey, that guy looks like, hey, that guy looks like Xander Berkeley. Well, it's not Xander Berkeley. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, So it's what took you to Maine, and what have you liked about it, and what do you miss about LA?
Well, what I miss about LA is the community of friends that I built up over decades. And, you don't make new old friends. And it's a given in New York and Los Angeles that you're going to have access to a really wide pool of creatives. So my crowd was a lot of writers and painters and musicians and actors and directors and cinematographers and production designers. And I threw a lot of salons and dinner parties and stuff because I enjoyed putting people together. I always sort of looked at it as a rehearsal for directing. Throwing dinner parties or producing, I guess, putting people together and seeing them hit it off. And my wife was Sarah Clark, brilliant actress. Was never in love with LA, and so I knew we were going to. And we got married on the East Coast. Her godmother had a little farm, and so we were always in the back of our minds. And then one day. Sarah was doing a pilot in Atlanta. We were living in LA, and I was getting the girls. I'm an older father, but I'm good at reading stories, and I cook for the family. I love cooking, and so I'm putting dinner together and getting them to go to sleep with a story either made up or read is kind of my thing. And my wife had that innate maternal ability to get up and make breakfast while making lunch, to put them in their car seats and take them to two different little private schools in LA. And doing all of that on my own was definitely a challenge. And I think I got through a couple of weeks, and it was the first weeks of school, and I was like, I got to have a dinner party and just have my friends read the books to the kids and leave a breadcrumb trail for them to watch a movie in the morning so I can sleep in. And I did that, and I guess it was a crack of dawn. My daughter got up, and it would just like she usually went for the movies, but she decided to get up in my grill that day and say, "Daddy, when are we going to get the farm with the barn and the property, so we can have animals and grow things?" She said, "We have to sell Beechwood to get a bigger farm, then that's what we got to do." And it was like, that was our neighborhood in LA. I thought, that's a big idea. Not a bad idea. It's a big one. Daddy's going to need coffee. And so she went down and started the coffee at 7. She just had turned 7. And the way the world works sometimes, out of the blue or through the ether, my friend Henry Kane, who I played baseball with, my mother taught him in 2nd grade, and we lived on either side of Main Street, USA in New Jersey, calls me, first time I had any contact with him in a few years, and sent me an email. I called him after he sent it. And the email was just, "Say, Xander, what are your thoughts on becoming a gentleman farmer? This piece of property just popped up. I've never seen anything like it." And there it was, the farm with the barn and the property, and where one could have animals and grow things if one wanted. And it was on the river. It was Wadsworth Dairy Farm is like ridiculously beautiful. And I call him up and I go, wait a minute, what are you doing, man? This is, my kid just said when we get at the farm or the barn or the property, he sent me this picture. And he goes, man, I don't know. I've never seen anything like it. I never just, things just don't just pop up on my computer. I don't even know why I sent it to you, but yeah, it just looked amazing. And okay. I called my wife. She thought I was losing my mind, taking care of the kids. It's too much. I've got to run away from it all and go to Maine. But she did say, well, look, we're going to go visit your mom at Christmas time. Why don't we check it out and just drive up from there, Connecticut, straight up, maybe around New Year's or something. And, wow, you would do that? That would be awesome. Let's do that. So we did, and then we loved the place, but it was a lot of snow, and we didn't get snowed in or get snowed out. We got up there all right, and the river is a big selling point, and so we went back in the summer and took our little summer break there in the place nearby, and met with some architects and thought about it, and then Sarah's show that we thought was going to get picked up in Atlanta didn't get picked up, and I ended up doing a show in Shreveport, Louisiana. So everything was all like as it is for actors. And somehow we were always able to weave in and out and not ever abandon the children altogether. We had help in LA. But just seeing this put a bug in our brains, and then exactly a year later, I got offered a movie in Maine, and that daughter ended up beating 150 boys out to play the part of my son. And there we were a year later doing this film and thinking, oh my God, like, what if we didn't get this place? I mean, how many signs do you need? It was the peak of autumn. It was everything that we had dreamt of, because we'd seen it in the peak of winter with all the snow, and then we saw summer with beautiful, just green, lush on the riverside, and then suddenly there we were in Maine, experiencing autumn in all its glory, and I just sort of stumbled out onto a rock and got reception, because the place had been becoming, we would have had to sell Beechwood to get it when it was first listed, but I got a hold of the real estate agent and asked her if it was still on the market, and she said, yes, it is. I said, what's it down to? We'll take it. You couldn't get a garage in a questionable part of the town in LA for what we got, a lot of acreage in this farmhouse, carriage house, barn situation. And so we just jumped in, and we'd go there in the summers and get away from it all. Sarah was so happy, and the kids were so happy. And, instead of, would come back to put them back in school in August and play soccer in these bleached, one place had like pavement painted green to make it look like grass, just baking heat. And, I think it was a couple of years in when we just said, well, why are we going back? Do we have to? And so we got, if you sell a house in the Hollywood Hills, you get 2 houses in Maine. And so we got a place in town with a great school system that wasn't as much of a cultural shift as moving out to Western Maine. Is still pretty rural, and it's a beautiful area. But we ended up getting all in, and we've got an inn down the road from the farm, and so now we can potentially, we're looking to make films here. It's been an uphill struggle to try and get tax incentives, competitive tax incentives for film. One of the things everybody loves about Maine is that it's so slow to change. And one of the things that can be frustrating is that it's so slow to change.
You mentioned that you want to get films up there, and a lot of films like New Jersey's trying to get trying to get a lot of work now, and they're shooting a lot of stuff more in Philadelphia, in that area.
Yeah.
Why are productions leaving LA, and how has the industry changed? Because I know the pay rates changed for actors. Commercials are now many more non-union. They used to be union. You don't hear about that $100,000 commercial anymore that the people used to get the checks in all the time.
Mhm.
How is LA, how is Hollywood changing in your eyes? Because you've been in it, you've worked with the greats, you've been acting for a long time, and you've seen strikes. We've gone through strikes, writing strikes, acting strikes. How is it changing in your eyes, and why do you think productions are leaving LA?
Well, I think I remember during the writer's strike around 2008 that a statistic emerged after that period that where 80% of all film production used to take place in LA and 20% elsewhere, that had actually reversed, so that it was 20% in LA and 80% elsewhere. A lot of other countries, like Canada, they used to make movies when I first started making movies in Mexico, and I got a chance to be down there a lot and loved working down there. But there's just they had crews that were really skilled, but were much more affordable. And then Canada started providing great tax incentives for film up there. And one production after the next, I ended up in Vancouver over and over, and then in Toronto doing a series sort of around that time. And we just sort of discovered that there was life outside of LA, and really enjoyed living and working in Toronto for a little few years there. And it was coming back after that. It was all around this same time that we just sort of, it was so crowded. It was we lived up in the hills, and Yelp and Google had published best walks in LA were up our road, and the Hollywood sign was there, and people were standing in the middle of the road taking pictures of themselves with the Hollywood sign in the background. We live in here. Get out of the way. And just the streets just getting filthier, and just squalor seeming to just multiply. A lot of, back to the homeless thing, a lot of the red states were doing the Greyhound passport trick of just giving people a few $100s and a ticket, one-way ticket to California where it's warm, and to make California look bad. And the problem was already, that for some reason, despite all this well-intentioned stuff on the left, there's just the problem never seemed to really get addressed. And one way or another, there's, people with real estate don't want to put up something that's going to cause their property values to go down. It's a big, complex situation. But it was just a kind of getting to be a mess there in LA. And we always felt like the whole place was about to burst into flames. We just remember feeling like it's like a blister about to burst. When we moved, and then the first summer we were here, which would be 7 years in June, full time, the fire started, and then the next summer it seemed to rage all summer long. And whatever you want to put it on, climate change is pretty real, and being in a place where there's a lot of clean water, and I had missed growing up on the East Coast. I'm sure you did too. Just that, you'd read books about the changing of the seasons to the kids out in LA and go, yeah, this really is a real thing. You trust me. And then, you're there, and there's just nothing quite like experiencing the seasons changing. And I'd missed that so much living in LA. So I miss my friends, and I'm making friends here. And there's a great growing creative community, a lot of diaspora during the pandemic from Brooklyn and other parts of New York. And there's a great crowd kind of getting together, and we're going to make movies here one way or the other. Even if it's a smaller budget, a lot of experimentation with different things going on here too, in terms of AR and video games and animation. And there's a lot of interesting new directions, I think, that are going to emerge. But film production is down by almost 50% this year, and the studios aren't really figuring out how to stream and make it profitable. And it's, I'm sure because you interview people all the time, that, and then the amount of people are shooting in Romania and Czechoslovakia and all over the place now because they have crews and people aren't spending money. the big tentpole movies that cost hundreds of millions of dollars are on one extreme, and then everything else seems to be these micro budgets. Maybe you get lucky, you land one of those limited series. I sort of took myself out of the running for series for a while because I didn't want to move the family to Maine and then ditch them. I didn't want to miss the kids growing up. But now I'm opening back up to it because we wanted to get them out of LA before they turned into teenagers, and we succeeded in doing that. And they've had this great childhood in Maine, and we're endlessly grateful for it.
Now you mentioned series. How did The Walking Dead affect your career? Because that's like the fans are very rabid. They love it. And you're an actor. There's certain fans they just love their shows. There's shows you've probably been on 24. I'm sure the fans they remember you. But how did that affect your career? Did people start recognizing you more? Because you always change your look. Like right now you have the long hair. Sometimes you're very clean cut. So how did that affect your career?
It's hard to determine how that in itself did, because it was after that I said I wasn't going to do another series, because if you're a parent and you're sent to a location and they own you and they don't have to let you go when you want to go, can I go see my kids this weekend? Well, we might need you for second unit. Something might come up. No. And that I couldn't do that anymore. That happened to me in Shreveport and in Atlanta, and I just so frustrating because so much changes with kids in a short period of time, and I always really, it was really important to me to be a present father, and so I told my agents at the time that I wasn't going to do a series. I'd do a movie here and there, limited periods of time, and they said bye-bye. They dropped me, and that was fine. I had a manager, and I just sort of picked and chose. And like I said, we have an inn now. We're sort of building a life here. It's not entirely dependent upon the acting, although, because I want to do writers retreats and artist retreats and stuff like that. It's so beautiful out there, and it feels good to be a part of the community. There's a restaurant in the place that rent from us, and we're friends with them and the innkeepers that run it. And I've got this place I sort of want to be a home on the road for my traveling musician friends. And there's a great community of musicians here in Maine. So just sort of picking and choosing what I do, and now open to the possibility of doing something like that. A limited series, but I'm finding I'm moving into the horror genre, because it's still a type of movie that they're able to get financed, and I'd always avoided it. I never wanted to get any splatter on me, maintain a position of some discretion and integrity, and not go for that gruesome stuff as much. I did Candyman, which was like smart art horror. I'm very snobby. At the end of the day, I'm a little bit the snob. And I thought that was cool. And I did one a few years back called The Dark and the Wicked that I think fell into that category as well. And now I'm still working on one, finishing the artwork for it, and have two more lined up. Because I do think it's a really interesting genre to explore. And getting back to The Walking Dead, which had a horror side to it, I think that I needed to take a little break after playing that character, because it broke a lot of rules. Like, you're not supposed to play a coward. Like, all the old cowboy actors had a few, like, never play a coward. They'll never forgive you. And there's never let him make you beg for your life. And, I played the weaseliest coward of all time on The Walking Dead, and he's a douche on many, many levels. And I remember they had to talk me into doing this thing. My agents wanted me to audition for an asshole? I think I've pretty much shown I can do that. And they weren't giving much away about the character. And the showrunner said, well, I said, why would I want to do this? I got kids. I want them to see me as some other shit hill some point down the line, They're flipping through the channels. Yeah, Dad, what a douche. So he said, well, no, but here's the thing. I really think that this is going to be funny. And I used to be a comedy writer, and we will keep it real. But what I would like about your performances in serious movies is you always bring a sense of humor. And so he was talking. He was buttering me up that way. I think it's going to be funny. I get to make them laugh, but they're not supposed to know I'm making them laugh. They think they're going to laugh at me. All right, okay, gotcha. And then he said, and I'm a pop culture fan, and I always wanted to see George Mason in 24 face off with Trevor from Grand Theft Auto. I don't know what that is, but he was a good little matchmaker. Stephen Ogg and I totally hit it off and had a blast working on that together. And it was funny and real at the same time. But the ending the show having to beg for my life, like literally, squealing like a baby while I'm getting hung and on horseback. I think I had to withdraw from pop culture for a little bit just to let the residue of that. Because I remember after the first season, I said, do we see a redemption in sight anywhere? I think I've played every color of the unctuous rainbow so far in this. And he goes, well, I mean, that's the thing. Unctuous is really more of a feature than a bug with Gregory, so no redemption. Okay. Then go ahead and hang me. I'm done. Yeah.
Real quick, you mentioned pop culture. I want you to tell a story, and because you've told me this story before. And I was driving this morning, and in my Amazon playlist, some Clash came on. And I know you work with Joe Strummer. And now, tell me, where was that movie shot? Was that shot in Mexico, or where was that shot? And what was it like working with, looking back, people who aren't familiar with the Clash? I mean, I post album when they come out, and I remember I posted about London Calling, and there was like 500 likes and comments because the album meant so much to some people. And I was just listening to their Clash City Rockers the other day. But what was it like working with him, and did you feel the brilliance?
Oh, yeah. I mean, after Sid and Nancy, the director had gathered up. I remember the last shot of Sid and Nancy, he said, get your shots, we're going to Nicaragua. Ain't there a war going on there now? Exactly. Okay, what's that going to be about? And so that was set up, and then he ended up, I tell the story of, I may have told you before, I hate to repeat myself, but the visas are difficult for us to get a hold of, as you may have anticipated, what with the war and all. So I've written a spaghetti western in 3 days, and we'll shoot it in 4 weeks on the old Sergio Leone sets in Almeria, Spain. And all the musicians who provided music for Sid and Nancy would like to try their hand at acting. They quite liked your performance in Sid and Nancy, so they'll be looking to you for some acting advice. And he's like, oh, well, Sergio Leone sets in Almeria, Spain. The Pogues, Joe Strummer, Elvis Costello, and others are going to be looking to me for acting. Okay. Twist my arm, I'm in. And Joe and I were hanging out from the beginning, and then I remember introducing him, but Elvis Costello came over, and I'd met him just earlier, and they'd never met. I remember introducing them, and Elvis, he's such a great guy. There's a shy side to him, especially back then, and he was like, yes, well, all right, nice to meet you. We'll see you around a bit. Yeah. And he took off, and Joe's like, oh, fuck, what's the fucking matter with him? Why didn't he sit down? I stood up, and I fucking complimented him. He didn't. And he was a little, so I had to talk Joe down. Joe, he was so into it. He was like, he kind of had this Humphrey Bogart quality about him in Straight to Hell. And he would, wear his costume back off the set and kept his shoulder holster. They took his weapon from him, but wear the shoulder holster and the white shirt, and Bart Manson is sweating, and he was really loving the whole staying in character thing, and that was that was fun to watch. And then he did that in Nicaragua too. He was in that film, and he'd grown out his beard and hair, and he was just playing sort of one of the ruffians that got roped into going down there. And but I hung out with him a lot back in LA too, and it just always felt like such a privilege because he's such a smart guy, and took his political activism was really thoughtful. His father had been an ambassador, and he was really well informed, and he had a big heart, and yeah, I loved all of his music right straight through to the last stuff he was recording with the Mescaleros, and yeah, it was an honor to get to be friends with him and all the others on that.
Now, you've worked with so many great people. Is there anyone that, besides Joe, that really you have that, oh my God, I'm working with this person? Because it's like, when I interview people, it fascinates me that I get to talk to people. But is there anyone you worked with or someone who actually sort of like took you under your wing that you were like, holy shit, this is such and such, and they've really taken an interest to me, and they're helping me out?
Well, I don't know how many times I got taken under the wing. I was always assuming to play the antagonist to their protagonist, and it disinclined one towards offering a wing. And it's interesting how protective a lot of stars are of their image. If they play the opposite of the coward, if they're playing the invulnerable and heroic, a lot of times it's a tricky thing to get them to have just a moment even of vulnerability and hesitation when meeting with someone that is their opponent in a scene in the story, because they're habitualized to always be strong and always be the winner. And they've read the end of the script and they know they're going to win in the end. So it's easy to forget that it's important to keep the dramatic tension alive, to play the moment that there is a threat there, and how do you deal with that? And so that's been an interesting thing. But in general, I think that maybe prevented some of that kind of being taken under the wing. I really, who I was in awe of, got to work with Pacino in a couple of plays as well as in film. Cat, what are you doing? And he was, one of the acting gods when I was growing up, and Robert Duvall, I got to work with him, and he was just, I never got to work with Gene Hackman, but I always really wanted to. And Duvall had that same serious vibe that I always picked up, and from people I know that worked with Gene. I read some great stories of how he let down the guard but he didn't suffer fools, and Duvall didn't even, both Pacino and Duvall were really, they knew who I was, and they were grateful that I was playing these scenes, and that because there were smaller roles that I was willing to do because it was them, and it was really, really fun interacting with them. And I there's so many great actors that you get to work with along the way, and it's always interesting to see how they work, and you kind of get over the starstruck thing pretty early on, although working with Clint Eastwood is kind of like, I wasn't as much a fan of his work as I was just, it was like looking at Mount Rushmore or something. Wow. But I grew to like a lot of his movies. Yeah. When you're working with, Harrison is a great guy. He's fun. And Gary Oldman, I worked with on Sid and Nancy and again on Air Force One. And I'm glad to see he's getting the kind of accolades and respect now that I think he always deserved. And yeah, Yeah, I don't know if I've answered your question.
You have. I have one final question for you. You've had a very good career. You've worked with a lot of people. You've been stage, movie, theater. You paint. You do all kinds of artist stuff. You're like the what is it? A Renaissance man, may we say, when it comes to the arts. But looking back at your career and your life, and you can answer this as professional or personal. When you look back at what you've done, what makes you proud? What do you sit there and go, it brings pride to you, going, man, I did this, or I helped this, or what are some things that make you proud about your career and life?
Oh, I guess just being able to become established in a field that's so competitive, and to have convinced enough people, with my acting, that I could be perceived in all sorts of different ways and play all kinds of different people. And that I've always held being a good, helping the director tell their story. And I studied all sorts of different styles of acting so that I would be able to work with all different kinds of actors and directors and different ways of working and not be stuck in one way. And I was always drawn to the idea of being a chameleon and transformation through makeup, costume, behavior, how you walked, how you spoke. And still getting to work steadily as I'm getting older, that I continue to be a useful instrument in the telling of stories and the bringing to life different kinds of people. And it's made me a lifelong sort of student of people and of human behavior and psychology and how different makes different types of people tick, and being able to balance that with a life, being a good father and being a present father, even if I've got to go away from time to time. And I've made up for it by being there more than a lot of fathers are, because when I'm off work, and I'm just there and cooking, shopping and cooking, and and doing the artwork is something I can do while I'm home, and balancing those things out, the two careers, the two kids, my wife and I both working and keeping that going. We keep getting to work together on things. So every movie that comes to Maine finds out we're here, and so we end up working together on those. But I think we just did one with our youngest daughter recently that was like a short film that is going to be made into a feature, and that was super fun. And there's another movie that's been written that wants the two of us to play these two characters. And I think we're getting up there in terms of the numbers. A lot of it are these smaller movies, but I'm really proud of them. And as far as what I'm proud of, I pride myself on having been able to go back and forth from big box office stuff to little micro budget stuff, and from big pop culture TV to obscure independent, even short films and stuff. It's doing it, and always wanting to get better at doing it, and trying to have fun in the creative process without taking myself too seriously. And at some point I got to get my act together to direct, and that I think I'll be really proud of that when I finally pull that together, because that in a way melds all these different. I'm not quite the classic Renaissance man, but it takes the visual artist and the actor and the communicator and puts it together with it's such a visual medium. I'm really looking forward to composing with a good cinematographer the telling of a story. Get that. I gotta get off my butt. I won't be really proud of myself until I do that.
Well, there you go, man. I want to thank you. You're always a pleasure to talk to. You've had such a great career, and people, you have to go see No Address, and just look up Xander. He's got like over 200 IMDb credits. It's a lot of damn IMDb credits. I'm impressed when people have 100.
254. Yeah. There's a bunch that aren't listed yet. I'm going for quantity.
He's going no, but you do.
I'm trying to keep the quality up.
So exactly. So people check them out. Also go to my website CooperTalk.net. I have over 1,037 episodes. If you're on YouTube, go look up the Coop Tank. It's my weekly business roundtable. I talk to local Philadelphia, New Jersey business people. We talk about networking, motivation, what fears you have. I got a lot of great entrepreneurs on there. And don't forget also Coop's Comedy Corner on YouTube. I talk to TV comedy writers, stand-up friends of mine, and comic actors. So check that all out. And remember, I'm Steve Cooper. I'm only as hip as my guests. Don't forget, drink your water, eat your vegetables, take your vitamins, and I'll talk to you next time.